My dad only looked at me when he had something to correct. Not when I graduated. Not when I got my first job. Not when I moved across the country and built something I was quietly proud of. But if my shirt wasn't pressed at a family dinner, or if I gave a one-word answer when he wanted a speech, that's when he'd look up from his plate and find my eyes. I learned early that being invisible in my family was a full-time condition, not something I'd done wrong. Just the weather. My brother Elliot was the sun. I was whatever was left after the sun went down. He's 3 years older than me. Pre-med at 20, MD by 28, cardiology fellowship at a hospital in Boston that my parents still drop into conversations the way some people name drop celebrities. They don't say Elliot works in Boston. They say Elliot's at Mass General. And they pause, just long enough for you to feel it. I never resented him for that. I want to be clear about something. Elliot didn't ask to be the favorite. He just was, the way some kids are left-handed or good at sports. It's not a choice. What he did choose over and over again was to stay quiet when my parents made me small. And that I felt. I'm the one who had the decent grades, but not the extraordinary ones. The one who went to a state school while Elliot went somewhere with a Latin motto on the crest. The one who studied urban planning, which my dad once described to his friend as something to do with zoning, while I was standing right there. After I graduated, I moved to Portland. Not for any grand reason. I just liked it there. I got a job at a small nonprofit that worked on community housing projects. The pay was modest. The work was slow. We helped families navigate affordable housing applications, worked with city planners, pushed for mixed income development in neighborhoods that were getting priced out faster than anyone wanted to admit. It wasn't glamorous. I knew that. Back home, at every Thanksgiving and Easter and random Sunday dinner my parents hosted, the question would eventually come, "So what are you doing now, Joel?" And I would explain it again. The nonprofit, the housing work, the policy side. My mother would nod with that particular expression she has, the one that means she's listening but not really absorbing. The way you half watch a show you've already decided you don't like. "That's nice," she'd say. "Steady work?" Elliot would get asked about cases, about patients, about the research he was doing on the side. My dad would lean forward like he was storing each detail somewhere precious. I stopped expecting things to be different. That's not defeat. It's just math. You run the same experiment enough times, you accept the result. The dinner I need to tell you about happened last October. Elliot got engaged over the summer to a woman named Claire. I'd met her twice before, once at a birthday party my parents threw for Elliot, once at a brief family lunch that lasted 40 minutes because Elliot had rounds. She was warm, sharp, the kind of person who asked follow-up questions and actually remembered your answer the next time she saw you. The engagement dinner was at my parents' house. My mother had been planning it for weeks. She sent a group text with a dress code, semi-formal, nothing too casual, which was her way of reminding me, specifically, not to show up in what she calls my Portland clothes. I drove down from Portland the afternoon of 5 hours. I stopped once for gas and a coffee I didn't finish. When I walked in, the house smelled like the rosemary chicken my mom makes for occasions she considers important. The table was set with the good dishes, the ones that only come out when someone is being celebrated. There were maybe 14 people there. My parents, some aunts and uncles, a cousin or two, a few of Claire's family, her parents, her younger sister, and Claire's colleague, a woman named Dr. Adaize Obi, who I was introduced to briefly at the door and immediately forgot because I was focused on finding a place to put my coat. I found a seat at the far end of the table, not strategic, just where there was space. The dinner moved the way these dinners do. Someone made a toast. My dad told the story about Elliot's acceptance to medical school. The phone call, the moment, the tears. He tells it at every milestone. It's a good story. I've heard it 11 times. Claire's father talked about how much he admired Elliot. My mother glowed. Elliot sat at the center of it all and looked both genuinely happy and slightly uncomfortable, the way he always does when attention becomes a spotlight. I ate my chicken. I answered the questions directed at me. How's Portland? Still at the nonprofit? Are you seeing anyone? With the short, polite answers that keep conversations from going longer than they need to. At some point, my Uncle Kevin asked the table what everyone was working on. It was a broad question, the kind you throw out when conversation dips. Elliot talked about a new surgical protocol his department was piloting. Claire talked about her research. One of my cousins talked about a promotion. Kevin looked at me. Joel, what about you? Same work, I said. Housing access. We just wrapped up a 2-year project in North Portland. He nodded. In that way people nod when they're being polite but not curious. My dad said nothing. My mom had already turned to refill someone's water. I went back to my chicken. What happened next took me completely off guard. Claire's colleague, Dr. Obi, had been quiet for most of the dinner. She was seated across and 2 seats down from me, and we hadn't spoken beyond the introduction at the door. But somewhere around the dessert plates being cleared, she looked over at me with an expression I didn't immediately understand. Sorry, she said, and there was something careful in her voice, like someone who's just done a double take and is making sure of something before they say it out loud. Did you say North Portland? The housing project on Killingsworth? I looked up. Yeah, we just finished the second phase in August. She set down her fork. The Killingsworth Commons project? The one that won the HUD award this year? I felt something shift in the room, though I couldn't have named what. That's us, I said. She stared at me for a moment. You work for Groundline? I'm the director, I said. Have been for about 3 years. The table had gone quiet by then, not dramatically, not all at once, but in that gradual way where conversations trail off because something else is pulling attention. Dr. Obi shook her head slowly. I've been using your organization's housing stability model in my public health research for 2 years, the framework you published in the Journal of Urban Health last spring. I cited it in my last 3 papers. I didn't know what to say. I said something like, that's really good to hear. My department at OHSU has been trying to get a meeting with Groundline for months, she said. We want to collaborate on a longitudinal study, connecting housing instability data with health outcomes. Our coordinator kept getting redirected. She paused. I never connected the name. Elliot was looking at me. I noticed that specifically, not because it was strange for someone to look at you when you're being talked about, but because of the quality of it. He looked like he was seeing something he hadn't seen before, which was strange, because he's known me my whole life. My dad had put down his wine glass. My mom was still. The particular stillness of someone recalibrating. Claire, and this is the part I think about most, reached across and touched Elliot's arm, not to get his attention, but the way you touch someone when you want to share a feeling you don't have words for yet. I want to be honest. I didn't feel triumphant in that moment. I'm not sure triumph is the right shape for what I felt. It was something quieter. Like when a window gets cleaned and the light comes through differently and you think, oh. It was always like that. The glass was just dirty. Dr. Obi and I talked for almost an hour after dinner. We exchanged cards, actual cards, which she pulled from her jacket pocket with the confidence of someone who always has cards. We talked about the Killingsworth project, about the data gaps we've been trying to fill, about what a partnership with OHSU could look like. At some point, my dad came and stood near us. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, on the edge of the conversation, in a way I'd never seen him do before. My dad doesn't hover, he occupies, but that night he hovered. Eventually he said, I didn't know you'd published research, Joel. You didn't ask, I said, not to wound him, just because it was true. He nodded. There was a long pause. He said, I should have. That's all he said. 3 words. I've turned them over more times than I expected to. My mom found me later while I was in the kitchen, putting glasses in the sink. She stood next to me and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, why didn't you tell us more about what you were doing? I thought about that. I thought about every dinner where I'd started to explain and watched her eyes drift. Every phone call where she'd asked how's work and moved on before I'd finished the sentence. Every time I'd described the project and she'd said, sounds like important work. In the same tone she used to say, that's nice. I did tell you, I said. You just didn't have a frame for it yet. She didn't argue with that. We stood there for a minute. She handed me a dish towel. I drove back to Portland the next morning. 5 hours. I stopped at the same gas station. I got a coffee I actually finished this time. I've been thinking about what it means to be seen. Not the big moment. The dinner. Dr. Moment. Obi. The whole thing. But what it means that it took a stranger's recognition to make my family look up. That's not a tragedy. I'm not writing this so anyone feels sorry for me. I've built something real. I know that. I knew it before October. But there's something I want to say to anyone who's been doing quiet work in a family that only applauds the loud kind. You don't need them to see it first. You don't need the dinner table moment. The work is real whether or not anyone at your parents' table knows what to call it. I spent years shrinking the explanation, making it shorter, easier, less likely to be dismissed. And all that shrinking didn't make the work smaller. It just made me tired. Groundline has helped over 340 families access stable housing since I took over as director. We have a federal award on the wall and a research partnership in the works, and a team of 7 people who show up every day because they believe in what we're building. None of that started the night Dr. Obi put down her fork. It started in a cramped office on a Tuesday morning in 2019, when I decided that the work mattered even if no one at Thanksgiving could explain it. I still go home for holidays. I still sit at the far end of the table. My dad still tells the story about Elliot's medical school acceptance, and it's still a good story. But now, sometimes, he tells one about me too. He gets some of the details wrong. I correct him gently. He listens. That's new. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that night. Not the surface of it, not the moment Dr. Obi put down her fork and said my organization's name out loud, but the machinery underneath it. What made that moment possible? It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was years of choices that nobody saw me make. Every Tuesday morning, I showed up to a cramped office and worked on something most people in my family couldn't explain at a dinner party. Every time I drove back to Portland after a holiday and felt the familiar sting of being the afterthought, I still went back to work on Monday. Not to prove anything, not to build towards some moment of vindication, just because the work was real and the families we helped were real, and that felt like enough reason to keep going. That's the thing about character. It doesn't build itself in the big moments. It builds in the small ones, the invisible ones, the ones nobody is watching. Every time I chose to keep working instead of performing, every time I explained what I did without shrinking it to make it easier for people to dismiss, that was the choice, repeated, quietly, for years. There's a version of this story where I spent those years angry at my parents, where I let the comparison to Elliot hollow me out. I almost did. I won't pretend the feeling wasn't there, that particular ache of being in a room full of people who love you and still feeling like a stranger. I know that feeling. I carried it for a long time, but at some point I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, more like a quiet shift. I decided that their frame wasn't the only frame. That success, meaning a certain kind of institution, a certain kind of credential, a certain kind of dinner table-ready answer, that was their definition. Not the only one, not even the most honest one. What I built at Groundline is real. 340 families, a research model that a public health department cited in 3 separate papers without ever knowing I was someone's forgotten second son. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because somebody showed up over and over without an audience. Elliot is a good doctor, I mean that. He saves lives in ways I don't and can't, but I've spent years watching my family treat his kind of work as the only kind that counted. And what October showed me is that the world is wider than one dinner table. There are people out there who know what matters. Dr. Obi knew. She'd known for 2 years without ever meeting me. My dad said he should have asked more. 3 words. I've turned them over like a stone in my pocket, feeling the weight of them. They weren't an apology exactly, but they were honest. And I've learned to value honesty over performance, in myself and in the people I let close to me. If you've been doing quiet work in a loud family, I want you to hear this. The work doesn't need their permission to be real. Your integrity doesn't require their attention to hold its shape. Keep building. Keep showing up. Not for the dinner table moment that may come or it may not, but because what you're building has value that exists completely independent of whether anyone at your parents' table can name it yet. That's not stubbornness. That's wisdom. The slow, hard-earned kind.